I'm Mark Irons. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, clergy sexual abuse. The Vatican updates its guidelines for the handling of misconduct. We have a report from Rome. Second Amendment, why Republican lawmakers are sounding the alarm over a recent move by President Joe Biden. Never give up. The Holy Father has advice for those who are weary and worried. And headed in the right direction, a closer look at a new movie on a centuries-old spiritual pilgrimage. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. I'm Mark Irons in for Tracy Sable. Our top story tonight, workers in Israel launched a nationwide strike today, protesting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to overhaul the way in which judges are elected and possibly giving more power to elected officials. The proposal has sparked unprecedented opposition. Protesters say the plan will remove the country's system of checks and balances. Netanyahu himself is at the center of the crisis as he battles charges of fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes. The longtime leader's supporters say the demonstrations are simply seeking anarchy. Russian President Vladimir Putin is announcing plans to station nuclear weapons in the country of Belarus, which shares a border with Ukraine. NATO nations slammed the Russian president for what they call dangerous rhetoric, while White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said there is no indication Russia plans to use nuclear weapons. Joining us tonight to weigh in on all this, Vince Coglianese, editorial director of the Daily Caller and host of the Vince Coglianese Show. Vince, great to have you with us. Some pretty alarming headlines here. What's your take on this?
I mean, it is, of course, concerning. I think we are locked in a very dangerous game of chicken right now with a nuclear-armed country, Russia. And I don't think the Biden administration is giving very clear answers to the American public on how this ends. That is of great concern to me. Clearly, when it comes to Vladimir Putin, we have to rely on the idea that he is bluffing, but he certainly wasn't bluffing about his invasion of Ukraine. So when he starts talking about wanting to place nuclear weapons and even flirting with any use of nuclear weapons whatsoever, I think it would be foolish to ignore that. It's important that we pay attention to it and factor in the probability, the possibility that that actually occurs, God forbid.
And what do you make of the Biden administration's response to what they're seeing?
They're just telling us, hey, there's nothing happening here. Don't worry. I think the most important thing for the Biden administration to do, though, is to lay out for the American public what the end state of this is. If you ask members of the military, anybody who's ever been involved in a military mission, they always say you have to know what your end state is. What is the goal? And thus far, the Biden administration has not given clear answers because obviously Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky, they want very different things. So Vladimir Putin wants to take eastern Ukraine. At the very least, Vladimir Zelensky wants to retake everything back that existed in Ukraine prior to the invasion. Plus, he wants to also take Crimea back from 2014. That would bring this war to a whole nother level. And the Biden administration has yet to give clear answers on where the United States stands, given that we are financing almost the entire war on the Ukrainian side.
Switching gears here a little bit to President Biden's approval numbers, a recent AP poll shows those numbers dipping slightly below 38%. That's near the lowest numbers of his presidency. What's your take on that?
I'm not surprised by it at all. I mean, this is an administration that has left a lot of people with discontent, including people who've supported Joe Biden in the first place. And that is the product of the way people are living their lives right now and experiencing what is happening in the country. So just some basic examples for you. Obviously, the border crisis continues to be a massive problem. You're seeing infighting within the administration, the Biden administration, over this now. As people like the Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz say things that you would never hear Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary, say about the failures at our border. You also have an economy where things are so much more expensive. In other words, people are poorer now than before Joe Biden took office. We're watching banking crisis after banking crisis. You have towns like East Palestine, Ohio, that get ignored by the Biden administration as a toxic chemical cloud burns over that town until there's just so much public pressure that the Biden administration has to say something. So I would say it's story after story after story like this that is leaving Joe Biden about as unpopular as he's ever been.
Vince, what else is on your radar? What else are you following?
Well, obviously, in Washington, D.C., a big debate this past week was parental rights. The House Republicans passed a piece of legislation designed to give parents a, quote, bill of rights when it comes to the education of their children. And this kind of makes sense, actually, for the federal government to do, because federal taxpayers pay 8% of all public school expenditures across the country. So in exchange for that money, there's some basic expectations that taxpayers will have. House Republicans put forward a bill that said, look, if you are going to teach my child something, I should know what's in the curriculum. You have to make that public. If my child can't read by third grade, that has to be disclosed to me. That's so important that a child be able to read by third grade. If there's violence in the schools, it has to be made publicly known to the parents. These are basic expectations of public availability of this information. The unfortunate thing for parents who want to see that happen, Senate Democrats have no interest in passing it. And so we'll see. But right now, that thing looks like it's dead on arrival in the United States Senate.
Vince Coglianese, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us tonight. Pope Francis has released an updated version of his landmark legislation to counter clergy sexual abuse. Over the weekend, the Holy Father addressed the Church's method for handling abuse done by lay leaders of international organizations recognized by the Vatican. The new guidelines reaffirm the commitment to investigating cases of misconduct and harassment. It also provides protection for potential whistleblowers. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, can you tell us something more about this decree?
Sure, Mark. So after 4 years, Pope Francis has now updated and confirmed the procedures to be employed when it comes to sexual abuse in the Church. In 2019, the Vatican motu proprio Vos Estis Lux Mundi was published on an, as they say, experimental basis. We're speaking here about a church law, which is titled, "You're the Light of the World." And this biblical verse has, of course, been chosen on purpose because Pope Francis said that there is no room for tolerating crimes of abuse. And now this rule has been adopted, updated, and will take effect on April the 30th. And what does it actually say? Well, anyone has the obligation to report cases of abuse, including violence against vulnerable adults, as they're called, and not only against minors. And this refers to the abuse of religious women by clerics and cases of harassment of adult seminarians or novices by a superior. Those persons are dependent and, of course, cannot easily walk away from a situation of abuse, and it's therefore that they deserve explicit protection. The most recent allegations of this kind, just to give you an example, were brought up against Father Marko Ivan Rubnik, a Jesuit priest and also a world-famous artist, actually. Accusations here included claims of spiritual, psychological, and sexual abuse, and Rubnik is now prohibited from any public ministerial and sacramental activity. And he's required also to stay in the vicinity of Rome.
Well, tell us a little bit more about these new church norms and why they are only introduced on an experiential basis up until now.
Well, the procedures introduced in 2019 aimed at holding especially leadership accountable. No one in a position of power should be able to deny responsibility. So the motu proprio is quite far-reaching, and therefore almost 4 years were given to solicit feedback from bishops around the world. And one of the adaptations, for example, is to better protect the good name of a person involved in an accusation. There were quite a few prominent cases in the past where reputations and names were destroyed because of abuse allegations that turned out to be false. The late Cardinal George Bell is only one sad example. Now, dioceses must also operate an office where abuse reports can be filed easily. And the rules include protections for people who witness acts of abuse in addition to those who submit reports of alleged abuse. No obligation of silence may be imposed on them.
Andreas, obviously the abuses are a terrible and sad topic, but it seems that the Church is making progress. Would you say that?
Sure, Mark. There is clear progress. This weekend we have also witnessed, for example, a very high-ranking bishop in Germany stepping down amidst strong allegations of abuse cover-ups. Pope Francis accepted the resignation of Bishop Franz Josef Bode. He had played a key role in the German synodal path, but had come under immense pressure for his handling of abuse cases in his Diocese of Osnabrück. And also other bishops have come under pressure who did not play a good role, especially also in Germany. Germany, 2 of them who are involved also in the synodal path. Now we've just learned that that they also make big considerations regarding these new rules that are now coming into effect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this important update. Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Thank you. Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of a church leader in Germany over mistakes made in the handling of clergy sexual abuse cases. Bishop Franz Josef Bode has led the Diocese of Osnabrück since 1995. A report released last September detailed some of the errors he made. He says he hopes the move will bring healing in that diocese. President Joe Biden addresses the latest mass shooting, this time in Nashville, Tennessee. Investigators say 3 adults and 3 children were killed in a shooting at a private Christian school. President Biden addressed the deadly violence today at a previously scheduled White House event in the East Room. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Mark, good evening to you. The shooting this morning in Tennessee occurred at a school called the Covenant School. It's an elementary school. The female suspect, 28 years old, was killed by police. And this afternoon, President Biden addressed the deadly violence. Police received the initial call about an active shooter at 10:13 a.m. Central Time. The violence lasted about 14 minutes.
It's just, it's sick. You know, we're still gathering the facts of what happened and why. And we do know that as of now, there are a number of people who did not make it, including children.
A female shooter wielding 2 assault-style rifles and a pistol killed 3 students and 3 adults at the Covenant School, a Presbyterian school for about 200 students.
We have to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation. And we have to do more to protect our schools so they aren't turned into prisons.
Meanwhile, storm devastated Mississippi. President Biden issued an emergency declaration making federal funding available to hardest hit areas. 21 lives lost. The deadly tornado tore a path of destruction for more than an hour across a long swath of Mississippi. And in the press briefing room today, this update.
As the president said in a statement over the weekend, he and the First Lady are praying for those who lost loved ones in these tornadoes.
And there's a new push to put the Bible at the center of politics to save America. The America First Policy Institute just launched its Biblical Foundations Project. Subjects include health and education. AFPI President Brooke Rollins also praised the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
So as we gather here today, I also want to recognize the miracle in the Supreme Court's Dobbs case and the importance as we move forward of continuing to never forget, never stop defending, and never stop fighting for life at every turn.
Also tonight, Pope Francis offered a prayer for the storm victims yesterday in Mississippi. Eric? I'm sorry, Mark. I apologize, Mark.
It's fine. Owen, we're also learning more about the shooter in Tennessee. What can you tell us?
That's right, Mark. The AP is reporting tonight that the suspected shooter, the 28-year-old female who is now dead, actually at one time went to that school. I want to add a few more things, Mark, as well. The president, in his comments today, he commended police for their quick action in putting an end to the danger. He also called on Congress to pass his assault weapons ban, and he also asked Americans to look out for each other's mental health. Mark?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen. Thank you, Owen. In the wake of this latest school shooting in Nashville that left 6 dead, gun reform remains a hot-button issue on Capitol Hill. President Joe Biden has issued an executive order expanding background checks for gun purchases, but Republicans are sounding the alarm and have introduced a bill to codify rights to own guns. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Mark, Democrats up here on Capitol Hill say how many more of these shootings have to take place before real gun reform takes place up here on Capitol Hill. But Republicans say what President Biden is proposing about this assault ban just goes way too far. All 10 Republicans have decided on the Senate Judiciary Committee they've come up with a bill to codify the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms.
Some of my colleagues believe that only the federal government is entitled to own guns through their police forces. And this is America. You can believe that. But that's not what the Supreme Court has said.
there is no law-abiding gun owner that is a threat to public safety. Yet the Democrats want to make it about the gun and not about the person who possesses or has custody of that firearm.
The Republican bill to codify owning a gun would also prevent a future Supreme Court from reversing the decision. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine has introduced a bill banning assault weapons and tells me any changes cannot be at odds with the Constitution.
Second Amendment, is already in, and I don't think I'm a supporter of gun safety laws that are consistent with the Second Amendment, but I certainly can't alter the Second Amendment with anything I propose. It's in the Constitution.
Committee Chair Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, says he was troubled by a lower court's ruling.
A panel of judges struck down a federal law barring those with domestic violence restraining orders from possessing guns. I can't square that decision with the actual danger that women and police officers face from armed domestic abusers.
But the ranking Republican on the committee, Senator Lindsey Graham, says Democrats have a much bigger agenda at work.
This is a concerted effort to attack the fundamentals of the Second Amendment as part of an effort to maintain control of the Senate, take back the House, and win the White House. To conservatives, this is a wake-up call.
The Republican-backed Respect for Second Amendment Act will not pass the Senate without some Democrat support. But as you heard, Democrats and even President Biden himself wants to be able to ban assault weapons and have stricter gun control measures. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
We have a lot more still to come on EWTN News Nightly, including possible miracle, why an archdiocese in Connecticut is conducting an important investigation, and new developments in the murder of an auxiliary bishop in Los Angeles. A Catholic priest in Connecticut says an investigation is underway into a possible Eucharistic miracle.
And one of our Eucharistic ministers was running out of hosts, and yet they didn't. And suddenly there was more hosts in the Ciboria. Just God duplicated himself in the Ciboria.
This video was taken at a mass in Thomaston, Connecticut earlier this month. Father Joseph Crowley says the moment was, quote, very powerful and very real. Local media report the Archdiocese of Connecticut is investigating the possible miracle. The man charged with murdering Los Angeles Auxiliary Bishop David O'Connell has pleaded not guilty. Carlos Medina is the husband of Bishop O'Connell's housekeeper. Medina appeared in a Los Angeles court last week. In February, prosecutors said he had admitted to the murder. Any possible motive for the murder remains unclear. The suspect is being held on more than $2 million bail and is expected back in court in May. Well, today we remember the foundress of EWTN on the 7th anniversary of her death. Mother Angelica died on this day in 2016 on what was Easter Sunday. The former Rita Rizzo founded the network in 1981 in Irondale, Alabama. She was armed with just $200 and 12 cloistered nuns. Today, EWTN is the largest Catholic media organization in the world. Its 11 channels are broadcast in multiple languages. To more than 4 million TV households, Mother Angelica was 92 years old. And up next on EWTN News Nightly, A Mile in Their Shoes, a closer look at a new movie about a centuries-old walking tradition. Plus, the Holy Father has advice on how walking with God can strengthen those who want to give up hope. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims tread the famous Camino de Santiago every year, hiking across a large network of ancient pilgrim routes that stretch across Europe and come together at the tomb of St. James in northwest Spain. Santiago, the Camino Within, is a movie featuring the spiritual journeys and profound experiences of pilgrims along the famous route. It hits theaters tomorrow. Joining us tonight is Bishop Donald Hying of the Diocese of Madison, Wisconsin, and the voice behind the Camino Within. Your Excellency, it's great to have you with us. Let's get right to it. Tell us about the movie and how you became involved.
Erin Berghaus, a good friend of mine of Ahava Productions, she founded Ahava Productions, is the one who both directed and produced the film. She's a convert to Catholicism. She's an artist and a musician, and she accompanied a group of young people that I walked the Camino with several years ago and put this beautiful film together. If you're not able to ever do the Camino, this is the next best thing, because it really gives you a sensory experience, not only the physical beauty, but also the spiritual beauty of such a pilgrimage.
That's great. What was it about St. James, you think, in his life that draws so many pilgrims to make this journey every year?
Certainly his connection to Jesus, that he was one of the 3 apostles that were at the Transfiguration, that were in the agony in the garden with the Lord. It's always Peter, James, and John. It's kind of the inner circle. And secondly, I think his pastoral courage, his apostolic zeal in going to Spain, going to the end of the known world in order to bring the gospel to people who had never heard of the Lord. So there's a spirit of adventure with the gospel. There's this freshness of evangelization. And I think just the beauty of the way that leads to this remarkable cathedral. When you finally get there, you feel like you've entered the celestial city, as it must have appeared to medieval pilgrims after walking for months.
It's true. In full disclosure, I've only done a small section of the Camino, but I want to ask you, Bishop, it's a journey that goes across all of Europe, different parts. It's not always an easy journey. What is it about it? What happens to a pilgrim along the way, in your words?
I think it opens one's heart. There's people that walk the Camino for myriad of reasons, some not explicitly spiritual, but I think there's something transcendent and very physical and real. So you feel the pain of having walked 17 miles. You feel the exhaustion. You see the beauty. You get dirty. You get sweaty. In our virtual world, I think people are longing for something that is just fundamentally real. And it really puts us in touch with the sacramentality of Catholicism. We have saints, we have buildings, we have statues, we have Camino routes. It hits all of the senses, and I think going on a pilgrimage, walking the way of St. James, just is the sensory experience of the richness of our Catholic faith.
And as we mentioned, the movie hits theaters tomorrow. What do you hope the takeaway will be for viewers?
I think a sense of just simply God's beauty, truth, and goodness, the apostolic antiquity of the church that is still with us, and hopefully it will inspire many people, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, to look at the Catholic faith with a new, fresh perspective, that this is not simply something that restricts our freedom or diminishes our joy, but it's a reality that opens us up to the beauty of God himself, and that we too can be apostolic in our response to Christ.
Well, we're looking forward to the film. Bishop Donald Hying, great to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis reminds the faithful that if we are ever tempted to give up hope, our Lord is ready to strengthen us and refresh our lives.
Il messaggio è chiaro. Gesù dà la vita.
In his Sunday address at the Vatican, the Holy Father says we walk with God taking our hand, the same way little children learn to walk. That way, even if we fall or encounter trouble, someone stronger is able to keep us safe. We thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Mark Irons. Good night and God bless.